The Festival of Transport takes place in War Memorial Park just south of the town centre in Basingstoke. It's split into two sections, clubs and groups in one area and individual and commercial vehicles in the other. We're going to take a look around the club section first, and with over 1,000 vehicles on site, I think we're in for a treat. Starting at the south end, there's the Fiat 500 Enthusiasts Club, which had a good turnout of half a dozen vehicles, including this 1970 500L. As an L, this is actually 2.5 inches longer than the predecessor and still over an inch shorter than a classic Mini. The L still had the same 499cc inline 2 carried from its inception, which is where the name derives. Next to it is a later 500R, the R being for Rinnovata or renovated, but perhaps in this case should be retrofitted, since this one, owned by Rosetta Rossa 500 on Instagram, has had an engine swap. Gone is the 499cc, and in its place a 652cc from the Fiat 126, which somewhat replaced the 500, although manufacturing overlapped by quite a few years on these models. One major benefit of this swap, making it very popular, is the addition of synchromesh on 2nd through 4th gear. The Imp Club actually have only one Imp in their lineup here at Basingstoke. First we have the start of a pack of Huskies, which was the estate variant, followed by an Imp Saloon from 1970, and then another Husky. All of these are powered by the same 875cc 4-cylinder, which sits somewhat inconveniently under the boot floor in the Husky. This one's also providing yet more evidence that just about anything can look good on a set of slot mags, and the contrast paint works great with the crisp shoulder line on this car. Between this and the last Husky, not another Imp but a Singer Chamois, the badge-engineered premium offering from the Roots Group based on the Imp with a posher interior. In the Sport model, as seen here, the engine has a 10:1 compression ratio instead of 9, double valve springs, a different cam, and servo brakes. But the only interior change was to a 100-mile-an-hour speedo instead of a 90. On the Renault Classic Car Club stand was this incredibly clean Renault 11, which only found its second owner a few years ago and spent most of its life inside a cosy garage. It's covered a mere 66,000 miles in 37 years, and the interior is a real testament to that. The previous owner apparently said, to their knowledge, no one has ever sat in the back seats at any time during their ownership of the vehicle. A properly astounding feat. Next to it, wearing what has to be the most perfect number plate match to a vehicle I have ever seen, is this Alpine A610 Turbo. The successor to the Renault Alpine GTA, it shares a considerable amount of its styling with its predecessor, and you might get the impression that it's just a slight tweak on the previous model, but save for the glass, it is a completely different body. The PRV engine increased from 2.5 to 3 litres, making an extra 50 horsepower over the previous turbo, as well as knocking almost a second off the 0 to 60 time. I absolutely love the way these look, the dished wheels, the louvers on the back, it's just a phenomenal looking car, and it has pop-up headlights. Tearing myself away from the A610, further along the row is a special edition Renault 18. This is a 1-year only 1983 American. This is one of only 1,500 Americans made for the UK and one of only 25 R18s of any model or trim on the roads as of writing. This has to be one of the rarest cars here. Hell, even the A610 has 14 siblings, but American isn't a trim level listed on how many left, so we can't really tell. These came with the black over silver paint scheme seen here, alloy wheels, and a really plush interior, proving popular enough that they did make a second generation. The American 2 was launched in 1984 in much greater numbers, so really the 1-year only is a bit of a technicality. If you know of another 1983 Renault 18 American, let me know in the comments. Last up on this stand we have the Renault Sport Spider, one of the 60 made in right-hand drive and featuring a full-size windscreen. These were also made with an aero screen across the cowl where the wiper mechanism sits, which directed air coming up over the bonnet, up in front of the passengers where the windscreen would otherwise have been, and this saved 35 kilos on an already very light, all-aluminium chassis with plastic body panels. Alpine actually built the Spiders in the Dieppe factory, which also produced the A610s, but it was sold under the Renault Sport name, and it was actually the first car to be marketed as that. Among the Morgan Sports Car Club's attendees was this Aero Supersport, an evolution of the Aero 8 and styled after the Aero Max in a limited run to celebrate 100 years of Morgan. This iteration carried over the same 4.8-litre BMW V8 from the Aero 8 Series 4 and was later available as a coupe from 2012, whereas this model has a removable Targa roof panel which fits into the boot. Something I noticed on this one was the lack of a chrome bezel around the headlights, which does a great job in reducing the awkward cross-eye look that the Aero 8 was initially very famous for from certain angles. And while we're on the subject of lights, an interesting carryover from the Aero Max on both these models, as well as the subsequent Series 5s, is the rear lights. These were borrowed from a Lancia Thesis. There were lots of other Morgans on the stand with V8 and V6 engine models alongside this 2024 Plus 4, which has a 2-litre BMW Turbo inline-4 making 255 horsepower and cracking 60 in under 5 seconds. One you don't see too often, however, is this 4.4 4-seater, here with a much more sedate 1.8-litre Zetec. The original Minis group was out in force with nearly a dozen vehicles on show, including an extremely rare Cooper S 40 LE. Built for the 40th anniversary and in a very limited run, this is one of 250 for the UK market. Each were equipped with rally spots, 13-inch sport pack alloys, arch flares, a full leather interior, and with an engine-turned alloy dash, which looks great. Underneath, they were all Cooper S spec, although an additional 50 were eventually made in work spec with a 1.4-litre engine, higher compression, big valves, and made 90 horsepower instead of 62. A little further down from the 40 LE is this almost entirely original Mini pickup, save for the stainless steel exhaust and halogen headlight upgrade. Despite being produced well into the Mark IV era, ending in 1983, these retained the original doors from the Mark I with external hinges and sliding, not roll-down windows. The Cavalier and Chevette Club had a huge stand with more than a dozen vehicles on it, and although I think they were exclusively Cavaliers at this event, I believe every single iteration and facelift was represented. What caught my eye at the end of the row was this extremely clean Mark II hatchback CDI. This one has undergone 2 rounds of extensive restoration, and the hard work has clearly paid off. A lot of people name their cars, and they're often derived from the plates which adorn them. This one, ending in CHW, became Chewy, and as a result has a complementary modification to go along with the name. Another car sporting an extremely relevant number plate and one of my favourite Grand Tourers of all time is this E31 8 Series on the BMW Car Club Great Britain stand. As a later model, it has the 4.4-litre V8 instead of the 4-litre, and while the power output remained the same, it had a bit more torque, but it also had improved fuel economy, a welcome addition if you're actually touring this long distances. This one also has what I'm convinced are the best looking BMW wheels ever created, the M Parallel, and even after 30 years the interior in these E31s looks so good. It wraps around the doors and flows into the centre console beautifully to just cocoon you while you're driving it. Also on the stand was a whole row of E39s, which at first glance might just look like a row of M5s with big wheels, M Sport bumpers and a generally menacing stance, and on any other day that would have been a spectacular lineup. But a full line of M5 by comparison would almost seem humdrum, because parked at the other end of the row to the not actually black M5 was an Alpina B10 V8. These don't use the S62 from the M5, they're a 4.6 litre, but the Alpina F4 really shares very little with the M62 it's derived from, found in so many BMWs. Moving further back, between the M5 and that first B10 are another 2 Alpinas, but both of these are the V8 S models, which was the run-out version, not the regular V8. These actually have the F5, the last version of the M62 from Alpina, and was increased to 4.8 litres, with more power, and considering only 42 came to the UK, this represents about 5% of the B10 V8S UK production run. All 3 have the same Alpina multi-spoke wheels, and as a result they're all lacking something I've never noticed before: a valve stem. That's because the valve stem is hidden behind the center cap, and even after you've moved the badge, found the keyhole, unlocked and removed the panel, you're still not actually ready to inflate or even check the tyre pressure on the wheel. You need an adapter to connect it to a standard tyre inflator, which fortunately comes with the car. Just probably don't lose it. The air runs down one of the spokes, which is hollow, and goes into the tyre as if it was a normal valve. A really ingenious way to make sure that the styling of your wheels remains absolutely clean. This year is the 60th anniversary of Alpina, so there were loads of other examples on the stand, including this mammoth E65 B7 with a supercharged 4.4 litre V8, an E46 B3S saloon in the best blue they've ever done, next to an E92 Coupe B3S bi-turbo, an E93 convertible bi-turbo, and then tucked amongst them was this 3 litre CS in all its shark-nose glory, looking resplendent in the sunshine. This was one of the first BMWs to feature the Hofmeister kink, a styling line in the C-pillar where the side-mount BMW badge was located on the 3200 CS in the early 60s. The overall shape is quite reminiscent in the E9 from the 3200, which isn't too surprising since it only followed on a few years later after debuting in 1968. Of course, in 1972, this would give rise to the first CSL homologation run to allow competition in the European Touring Cars Championship, which it went on to win 6 times. On the next row over, on a stand I unfortunately don't have the name of, we have a 1965 Mustang in gleaming white with a spectacular red leather interior. This is the first model year of the Mustang, and it has an engine I've never actually seen before in the flesh, the 200 cubic inch inline 6 thrift power. It was the second from bottom engine in 1965 and made 120 horsepower, but it became the entry level after the 170 cubic inch was dropped 2 years later in 1967, and it lasted till 1971. It actually made a comeback in 1979 for a few years as demand for the Cologne V6 well outstripped supply to North America. The Forenza was an evolution of the Vauxhall Viva with a fastback body, and in 1973 a high-performance model, the Forenza HP, was released, more commonly known as the Droop Snoot thanks to its GRP aero nose. They have the same 2.3 litre inline-4 from the Sport SL, but with parts developed by Blydenstein Racing, making more power, and thanks to the better aero, a higher top speed. The HP was also the first Vauxhall to be fitted with a 5-speed gearbox and the first production car anywhere to feature Avon safety wheels, which retained a tyre in the event of a puncture. Unfortunately, of the 30,000 predicted, only 204 were built. The Droop Snoot Group stand had a great display of them, including this example in flamenco red instead of the usual silver star mist, which has been with its current owner for more than 35 years. On this enormous stand packed with JDM hardware, whose group name I unfortunately also missed, and behind a superb line of Subarus is this Toyota Crown Athlete V Estate. The Athlete V is the performance moniker for the Crown model and left the factory with the 1JZ GTE. This is a twin-turbo version of the regular 2.5 litre 1JZ GE, also available in the Crown Royal and many other Toyotas. Officially listed as producing 276 horsepower and 280 pounds-feet of torque, these stated figures were frequently lower than the actual output of the engines delivered in vehicles and later tested. On the RS Owners Club stand, this two-wheel drive Sapphire isn't all it seems to be at first glance. As standard, it's just over 200 horsepower and 205 pounds-feet of torque. However, this isn't a standard Sapphire. The YB has been fettled and now packs 276 horsepower and 315 pounds of torque, and it brought receipts in the form of graphs to back up these numbers. There's an extensive build sheet in the window listing everything that's been done, including upgrading the brakes to 6-pot calipers, improving the cooling system with a larger radiator, and adding a big intercooler, just to name a few. Mixed in with this was a few modern RS, but the classics really stole the show, including one of the very last Escorts to wear the RS badge. Although the last-gen Escort model ran on into the early 2000s, the RS 2000 lasted only a little more than 12 months, finally ceasing production in the middle of 1996. The four-wheel drive version seen here was actually slightly slower to 60 than the front-wheel drive counterpart, likely down to having to drag that drivetrain around and still having the same 150 horsepower in both models, which just wasn't enough to carry around all of that extra weight. However, lack of power for a four-wheel drive system wasn't a problem for the RS Cosworth parked just next to it, complete with a famous whale tail wing on the back and seen here sporting an extra carbon lip on top of the boot lid spoiler below it. With 50% more power, these were more than 3 seconds faster to 60 and famously able to outrun pretty much anything the UK police had at the time. The gold wheels look great against the mallard green paint, tucked under widened arches, although in the right light it looks more blue than anything else, seen here on the bonnet in direct sun, its massive bonnet vents alluding to the YBT hiding underneath. Blue with gold wheels continues to be a solid combination on just about anything, including what might be the hottest hatch the 90s ever produced, even though they barely made it to the midpoint in the decade. This stand was absolutely jam-packed, but I'd barely made it through half the club stands at this point, and even that was only half of the event, and it was well beyond midday, so I had to move on, bidding the RS fleet a farewell. At first glance, this is a really handsome looking Jaguar XK140, but in actual fact it's not a Jaguar, at least not entirely. This is an Aristocat XK140, a kit car which makes use of any XJ donor from 1968 to 1996. That means you can use any Series 1, 2, 3, XJ40 or even an X300 straight 6, potentially including the 4-litre supercharged AJ16, assuming you could cram it all in underneath the bonnet. Because the XKs were much narrower than even the oldest XJ, these are up to 5 inches wider than an original 140, but only an inch wider than the 150 that followed, and that's all taken up in the centre, and as a result, the cabin space is much improved. I wonder if you could shoehorn the V12 into one. Next up we move into the VW section and this great looking Mark III Golf GTI. This one has the later 16-valve ABF, which was a pretty big step up in power from the 8-valve, which was a mere 115 horsepower and left the car feeling a bit underpowered. This one looks to be an all-original on the standard 9-spoke alloys and generally looks to be in great condition. And next to it we have something which at first glance also looks pretty standard, but in reality is far from it. Instead of the normal Mark II GTI engine making 110 horsepower, this one has a 20-valve turbo, specifically from a BAM, the same engine we're using in our car project, which, from our donor at least, made 225 horsepower stock. But the likelihood that this one is stock? Pretty slim, so take those numbers with a pinch of salt, and given this will weigh less than the TT, you can be pretty sure the 0 to 60 is probably less too. And depending on just how much more power it has, I'd wager VMAX is probably higher as well. Going back even further again, we have this stunning Karmann Ghia, only the second production passenger car model VW produced after the Beetle, and unsurprisingly, this uses mostly Beetle parts underneath. The styling owes a great deal to a concept car produced by Ghia in 1952, the Chrysler d'Elegance, a point acknowledged by both Ghia and Virgil Exner, the original designer of the Chrysler, who was reportedly extremely pleased that one of his designs made it into large-scale production, even if it wasn't in his original form. In gratitude, Exner was gifted the first production unit of the Karmann Ghia to enter Michigan upon its release. There's some very familiar headlights on this Alfa Romeo stand, as we've used the same units on our build. These were fitted to a variety of Alfa Romeos in the 2000s, including this Barrera, as well as the Spider and the 159. This Barrera S is one of a limited run of 500 made for the UK market, developed with ProDrive after the handling of the original car was criticised. Alfa Romeo and ProDrive collaborated together in the British Touring Car Championships, and the S model has upgraded Bilstein and Eibach suspension, some chassis modifications, and a sports exhaust, as well as some revised 19-inch wheels specifically for this model. Although there were quite a few modifications under the skin, externally it's really not much different from the non-S version parked next to it, although it does look really good in blue. Just behind these two Brera, you might notice another set of familiar lights, because for the rear of our car, we used lights donated from Amito, albeit without the grey beauty rings seen here, much like what Alfa themselves did on the 4C, recessing them into the bodywork, although prior to seeing this car and editing this video, I hadn't actually noticed they're the same or very similar units. Last up on the Alfa stand, this is the Sprint Veloce Cloverleaf, which started out under the Alfa Sud moniker before dropping it in 1979. It had a major refresh in the early 80s where it moved from the Alfa Sud to the Alfa 33 platform. This meant some major changes in the running gear, including abandoning some of the more unique elements of the Alfa Sud platform, such as the inboard rear brakes. The version you see here first appeared in 1987, and it was the last update to the styling Alpha made. The Sprint was only available for a couple of more years, which makes this example among the very last to be produced before being discontinued in 1989. There's no prizes for guessing there'd be a big contingent of MX-5s on show. After all, Miata is always the answer, but seeing a couple of turbos hanging off the side just warms the cockles of your heart, as well as your intake temperatures. First and second gens were pretty well represented across this side, and I'm going to come back to this red one in a moment to take another look at the interior, because that's had a lot of really nice work done. These are such a good car to get into for cheap fun. They handle great, they've got enough power not to get in too much trouble, and as proven here, if you do want more, you can absolutely get it without having to go too crazy. The aftermarket is chock full of parts that just bolt on, spares are easy to find, not to mention at this point, they're just a pretty well understood platform with a huge following. Back to this red imported NA, it's really steering into the Japanese theme, beyond just keeping the original plates on for the show, to reupholstering parts of the interior with this Japanese silk design on the door cards, the gear gaiter, as well as covering the glove box and the centre armrest. It's a really nice cohesive theme throughout the entire car, and something different from what you so often see. As you can probably tell by now, this show is massive and we've barely finished one side of it. I'll be making a second part walking around even more of the vehicles in the coming weeks, so make sure to subscribe to get notified when that comes out. Hopefully you've enjoyed this look around, and maybe we'll see you at the show next year. Thanks for watching, don't forget to check out some of the other videos on the channel, and we'll see you in the next one.